So there was a huge effort to silence me. I also noticed that people who were very active in this campaign were actually um, the Jewish, the so-called Jewish left. Jewish left is an oxymoron in itself. But they call themselves the Jewish left or Jewish progressives. I realized that they were working in concerts with Zionists and ultra Zionists. So all those campaigns actually helped me a lot to understand what is going on, what is the nature of Jewish power. It helped me to understand the Jewish power. It's that power to silence criticism of Jewish power. The more I learned about it, the more I understood that what we see in the West is a continuation of this identitarian project that is inherent to Jewish thinking. I just today, actually, I just a minute ago published a piece about the globalization of the 12 tribe tribes of Israel. So, if in the old days Jewish left tried to unite us, telling us we're all one people. It doesn't matter if you are man, if you are a woman, if you are Arab, if you are Jew, if you are German. We are all fighting against capitalism. In the last 20 years, what we really see is the complete opposite. They try to divide us, to make us fight one against the other. They divide us on biological, on racial, sexual orientation, gender base. And it is very, very sad. I just will say one more word, just to make sure that there is enough controversy and I annoy enough people. Um, um, the issue that some of us are having with, for instance, with Hitler, is that Hitler taught people to identify with their biology. Nobody really upset with Hitler because he believed in National Socialism. It was the racial or the racist element, the idea that people should identify with their biology. Nowadays, the left, and particularly the Jewish left, is doing exactly the same. They want us to identify politically with our gender, with our sexual orientation, with our skin color, with our ethnicity, with our race. And this is very, very problematic because if they really don't like Hitler and that aspect of Hitler, they should make sure that they don't do exactly the same, and actually they do. So this is me.
All right, thank you. So on that note, Julianne, you want to just tell us a little bit about your background and what brings you to this space, and then I'll kind of explain why I thought you guys might be a good interview subjects together. So
Yeah, sure. So whenever I do an interview like this, I usually mention that I had been teaching at the University of Tulsa, and there was a restructure announced that totally shifted the course of the university. Instead of being a liberal arts university, it went in the direction of a practical professional school. Focused on things like, and this sounds straight out of a Cold War novel, aerospace engineering, which is drone research, and cybersecurity and healthcare. So that was a complete shift from a 125-year tradition of liberal arts and professional colleges. And the language that was used in presenting this restructure to the faculty was so sinister. It talked about students as a commodity to be pumped through a pipeline, and the entire experience was so striking to me that I thought I have to dig into this. And part of the reason why I wanted to, or I felt compelled to dig into this, was because my academic training uh, was in political philosophy, and I studied the works of Eric Voegelin. And his question, he was a 20th century political philosopher, and his question was, how could we possibly explain the failure of liberally educated, intelligent Germans to stand up to the atrocities that Hitler was committing? So this is, with this interview, it's sort of come full circle. Like we're going to talk about Zionism and the Jewish question and things like that. And really that question was Eric Voegelin's, and it became mine in this concrete experience of watching the University of Tulsa be transformed. So that's a little bit about me. And I'm sorry, it's a little disorienting. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to look. Do I look at my camera, or
Oh, you're
am I
looking.
looking at the right place?
You've been doing fine.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like I see two different places. So once I started to dig into what was going on at the university, and I saw the repetition of language symbols throughout corporate marketing, throughout many different sectors of the local economy here in Tulsa, and then more broadly across the United States and in higher ed all over the United States. I came across the work of Alison McDowell, and I started looking into social impact finance and how a scheme has been created to make social engineering profitable. So I am on social media. I try to educate people about what's going on, about the mechanism of control that's tied to social impact finance, that's tied to the abuse of language, and that is ultimately, I think, it's a political religion, or it's a religious movement of some sort. Anyway, it's driven by, I think, very dark forces, and the symbols that those dark forces are using do tend to, I think, you can't investigate those without winding up looking at Zionism. So anyway, I'm glad to be able to talk about it. It's sort of an awkward thing to talk about, and I think that is part of a strategy that's been laid out over decades. But I hope today with this conversation, we can bring some clarity to the matter. And I'll just say that, I haven't met Gilad before, but I listened to your interview with Rabbi Shapiro. I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe in 2017. And
Yeah.
I thought the categories that were used in that talk about our, well, it was, the issue was raised about the Jewish people having this
Identitarian, yeah.
well, having a self-loathing or a self-destructive urge, and
Yeah.
I think many of us in the West have that, but perhaps it is most powerful or most potent in the Jewish people and that
Yeah.
identity. So I hope we can get into that, and I think that these are topics that ultimately go to the order of our souls, and so they are relevant to everyone, not just because of we're experiencing a totalitarian global coup right now, but so not just on the level of force and pragmatic political arrangements, but also really on when we try to understand if we're living well, if we're living an orderly life, we have to get to that question of the soul and its orientation. So thanks for inviting me to be a part of this today.
Yeah, thank you. And so it's interesting, everything that's happened this past year and a half has made kind of interesting bedfellows, which is, I come at this from, I would consider myself atheist. I'm not really a believer in any of the religions. I kind of view them from my perspective, I view them in the way that, we would view like mythology. But I also believe in, I believe I'm kind of a spiritual person, but I won't put it into a container. I don't really know how, it's more of like, I do feel like there's more to this, but I can't really say what that is. And I do believe in the values and everything. But so I come at this from a little bit different place than Julianne, who's Catholic. Julianne, also too, what's your PhD in? Just so what did you get
It's
your
from a
PhD?
it's a political science PhD, but I did political philosophy and political theory.
Hmm.
So, I look at ancient Greek philosophy, Plato, Aristotle. I love philosophy and lit. I originally wanted to write on Kierkegaard, and, he has this Gilad Smiles. I wonder if he's read him. He has a book called Fear and Trembling, which is about the sacrifice of Isaac and, the call to Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And I think it is a masterful depiction of the struggle that we're facing right now. And so I think, if I remember correctly, because I was listening to it late last night while I was doing laundry, but I think in the interview that I referenced between Gilad and Rabbi Shapiro, I think, Gilad, you mentioned that the Zionist perspective really is not ethically grounded at all. And that was something that Kierkegaard was struggling with in that book, a pseudonym. He was trying to understand this call to from God to sacrifice Isaac. So, from that ethical perspective, anyway, that's kind of where I come at this, from looking at Kierkegaard and Vogelin, Plato.
Yeah, and so Gilad,
can I
yeah,
interject?
yeah. Let me just.
I
I,
opened a can of worms there, didn't I?
I'm gonna jump
Yeah,
off for
it's
one
great.
second
It's
and just
great.
let you guys at it real
Yeah,
quick.
yeah. Okay, I think that I'm going to I think that I'm going to upset you a
No,
bit
you won't. I have a thick
because
skin.
okay, Zionism is a very misleading term. All right,
Right.
so Zionism in its origin, what we call early Zionism, came to life because some Jews in Europe were actually very upset by what they saw when they looked in the mirror.
Yeah.
They vowed actually to change, to become people like all other people. Zionism in its early form was actually anti-Semitic movement, it would be considered now as anti-Semitic movement. Now, we like to talk about Zionism, but there is, from the Israeli perspective, there is no Zionism after 1948 because Zionism promised to to bring to life a national Jewish home, and this national Jewish home was formed in 1948. I grew up in Israel. I was born in 1963, and Zionism for us was a very archaic concept. Now, for diaspora Jews, Zionism may be a meaningful concept because they are awaiting this process of metamorphosis, of becoming better people or whatever, better Jews. This is something that people don't know, but I'm sure that some of you heard the word aliyah. When an American Jew migrates to Israel, we call him, he made aliyah. Aliyah is descending in Hebrew. Yeah, so you become a better person. Leaving Israel is yerida, is descending. Yeah, ascending and
Mhm.
descending. Aliyah, ascending, descending, going down. Now, I was I was cheered by your references to Kierkegaard and to Plato because I think that I can offer a slightly better dialectic model that will explain what we see, and especially what we see now. And it is very possible, because you are a political philosopher. I'm also coming from philosophy, so I'm pretty sure that you will be familiar with these notions. So Leo Strauss, a Jewish
Yes.
philosopher,
Uh-huh.
who is not very popular among many of us, because of different reasons, partially because he's the father and the mother of our neocon enemies. But I'm not going to attack him now. I'm actually going to even praise him, because Leo Strauss was the philosopher who introduced the English-speaking language to the notions of Athens and Jerusalem. He didn't invent this matrix. It is something that was already kind of um, discussed in the Germanic philosophical culture since the mid 19th century. Um, but he was the one who brought it to America. He was himself a student of Heidegger, whom most Jews really can despise, um, really upset by. Okay, what is Athens? What is Jerusalem? And this is crucial for our understanding of COVID, because I will tell you in a second that COVID is a Jerusalemite
Yeah.
religion. Okay, so in Jerusalem, and we are not talking now about Jerusalem, the city, or some Palestinian or a friend of mine, people that I really cherish are always upset when I say Jerusalem. Said our Jerusalem is different. I'm not talking about Jerusalem, the city. In this dialectic dichotomy between Athens and Jerusalem, Jerusalem is the city of revelation, and Athens is the birthplace of philosophy. While in Athens, we teach you how to think for yourself. In Jerusalem, we teach you how to follow mitzvot. Okay? And this is a fascinating concept, because in Judaism, and you mentioned Shapiro, this is my big debate with Rabbi Shapiro. In Judaism, ethics is replaced by a legalistic structure. A lot of Jews will be upset when I say it, but every rabbi would agree with me that in Judaism we don't have ethics. What we mean by ethics? In ethics, we learn how to make the judgment by ourselves, how to make a moral judgment, ethical judgment. In Judaism, we learn how to deal with a legalistic structure. We basically learn to be Dershowitzes. Dershowitz is a classic Jerusalemite, and he's good at it. In Athens, we learn how to form a decision looking into ourselves, examining the facts, and producing a judgment. To a certain extent, or more than just a certain extent, what we see in the West, the rise of political correctness, for instance, is the Jerusalemization of our political discourse. Now, it is very, very important. So, what I'm trying to tell you, we are not talking really about Zion, we're talking about Jerusalemism. Jerusalemism, Jason mentioned, and I actually looked into your stuff, and I realized that Catholicism is crucial to your identity. Jerusalem is something that exists in Islam, and in Christianity, in Protestant thinking, in Catholic thinking, and so on and so on. So it's not just that the Jews are Jerusalemite. You can be a Jew and you don't have to be a Jerusalemite. It's rare, but it can happen, and a lot of people who are not Jews are Jerusalemite. I don't think that Fauci is a Jew, but he is definitely a Jerusalemite. The same applies to Bill Gates or whatever. What I, for instance, when I start to dig to understand the nature, and this is something that I really had a dispute with Rabbi Shapiro about. In Judaism, you don't believe in God. It's not a voluntary act. You see the light and you submit yourself. You actually accept that the first mitzvah, the first commandment, is to believe in God. And this is crucial. And why the first mitzvah? Because God, and this we can go back, we explains it in Immanuel Kant. We explains it in the most clear philosophical term. If God is beyond spatio-temporality, beyond time and space, we couldn't end it anyway. So in Judaism, they gathered that this is the issue and say, we follow mitzvot. We don't try to understand God. We actually follow a set structure of rules, and this is how we show our commitment. So it's all about practicing certain laws and so on and so on. Why it is so important? Because and I'm about to finish, so I don't want to take too much time. Because, for instance, in the COVID religion, we are not supposed to understand anything. Everything that we see, we learn. For instance, now we can see that with Delta, the vaccinated are catching Delta in even a growing rate, and still we tell everybody to go to get vaccinated. It doesn't make any sense. We talk about face masks, and we see that we were in lockdown, and still COVID happened, but we are still expected to put the face mask or to accept lockdown or to accept everything they tell us, because in Jerusalem we identify with symbolic identifiers. So practically the face mask in the COVID religion replaces the skull cap in the Judaic religion. We are adhering to symbolic identifiers, to rules that defy rationality. And this is really crucial. If anyone wants to read or to understand this concept, I think that the greatest Jewish philosopher, great thinker, is Yeshayahu Leibovich. I don't know if you ever have you ever come across? You can find a lot of his stuff in English. Yeshayahu Leibovich, he was an Orthodox Jew, a great philosopher, and also a scientist. And he said, I can prove that all those events that are described in the Bible never happened. But to believe is to believe despite, to accept counterfactuality. And this is exactly how COVID religion is operating. This is how left is operating at the moment. And this is, by the way, why Trump became popular. Not because he's that great, because he somehow managed to stand up against, and obviously he was himself compromised, so I'm I'm not one of his supporters, but it was very interesting figure for me. Oh yeah, I stop here.
Yeah, and so just to give the heads up, you guys, I lowered your bandwidth so I can preserve it for the live stream, because I have the ability to allocate bandwidth. So what you're seeing on your screen is a little bit lower in order to hopefully improve the quality of because we were getting a little bit of jumps there. Anyways, so yeah, and the reason why I wanted to bring you both together, because I was talking with Julianne, and and maybe we want to save this because Julianne might want to respond to what Gilad just said, but at some point, like the whole, with this whole COVID thing, since all that started, um, you know, trying to understand the why of it. You know, I've been doing shows with different guests, and these Israeli companies keep popping up that are part of this. And so I was talking with Julianne, and she started talking about the Noahide Laws, and I was just like, you know, I didn't really know what that was, but there's some interesting connections there. But I want to give Julianne an opportunity to respond to Gilad's last um, statements there.
Yeah, so uh, I actually, in my dissertation, I took on Leo Strauss. um, I think I think he is such an important figure, and actually, I was taught by Straussians. Most of my teachers were Straussians, and I think he brings so much to the table in terms of a hermeneutic um, method that we need to adopt. Like, I think he has a lot to teach, especially American readers, about how to read things and how to look at ancient texts. So for a long time, I would have thought that I would kind of fall in line and be a good Straussian. I mean, I'm not that smart or well read, and I know, so I don't think he would like me. But I thought that his method, his approach, his emphasis on primary text and always going back to those and questioning every word and giving authors the benefit of the doubt and really being fearless in your questioning. Um, I think those are all really crucial contributions that he made. And this Athens and Jerusalem dichotomy that he gives us, I think that's a very helpful framework. Um, you know, just not to get too deep into the academics of it, but Vogelin and Strauss, they had a rich correspondence. There's actually a volume. I've got it. I was wondering if I should jump up and get it. But there's a volume of correspondence between the two of them. It's called Faith and Political Philosophy. And so in my research, I look at the differences between Strauss and Vogelin, and they're very similar on a number of things, and they had a cordial correspondence, but where they differ is on the nature of reason itself. So Strauss, I think, tends to limit reason to logical syllogisms and knowledge that we gain from sense experience. So, you know, he wants to say that revelation, those are, you know, those kinds of insights don't come from sense perception. They can't be explained. They can't be universalized. So you're really isolated if you're working under a revelatory framework. You know, you're sort of claiming to have a special perspective on what's right, and it's not going to make sense to everyone. So you can't get into that ethical realm that where we could have arguments about what's right or wrong and really make a good decision for ourselves and maybe as a society together. So, and I think that, you know, that's an important contribution that he made. But Vogelin is going to, he comes back, and this is, I would say that I agree with this, and this is sort of my perspective on how we know, is my epistemological perspective, is that the very process of reason itself is a sort of participation in the divine intellect. So Vogelin, you know, he would not be on the side of Jerusalem as Strauss lays it out. He would say that's a political religion. And I think that's what you're saying, Gilad, is that this Jerusalemism or the cult of COVID, like it really is, it's an ideology. It is a system that is not based on reason. It's not based on verifiable facts. It's not based on sound logic, but rather it's based on this authoritative account of what
Of
is.
course.
And people, they follow it so blindly. It is, so it is, I mean, that's why people call it a cult or a religion. And I think that dynamic is that's the dynamic that Vogelin wanted to explain with this question that he raised about the Germans and the rise of the Nazi Party. He was like, why would reasonable people fail to condemn these actions that from an ethical standpoint are blatantly uh, wrong? How do you have the Academy not coming out and denouncing Hitler's actions? Why do you have politicians simply going along with it? And I think, to your point, we can say the same things of our academics and politicians today. Why do you have so many people in higher education who are just rolling over as we switch to Zoom education and contact tracing and forced vaccinations? Why do you have all of these PhDs who aren't speaking out about it? And same goes for politics, same goes for the medical profession. And so that's the question that Vogelin was really interested in. And I think if I can, just give put words in his mouth, I think the framework that Strauss presented, and like I said, I'll try not to go too deeply into this, but the Athens-Jerusalem divide, Vogelin didn't think that was that could explain ideology well enough. He thought that there was something missing in that dichotomy. You had to really understand the perversion of reason as a religious movement, but you also had to understand that the right order of reason has to participate in the divine. But it really goes to where you locate the divine. So Vogelin would say that people who formulate ideologies that blatantly contravene reason, they usually are operating off of assumptions about the nature of reality that are incorrect. And so they try to bring this divine reality into space and time. And they try to take hold of it and control it, really, because really that's what they want. They want control of reality. They don't want to have to answer to the God who gives the command. So the Vogelin goes into a psychology of ideology, and this is why I think what you said about the Jewish people and this sort of struggle with anti-Semitism is so interesting, because on Vogelin's account, we have a deep understanding that we live in a sort of tensional place between order and disorder, and we can always be progressing toward order, but we're always likely to slip and fall, and we can't do anything about existing in that middle position, like where it's very precarious, but we're ultimately not in control of it, and that generates a lot of anxiety that some people can't tolerate. So they come up with these second realities, ideologies, and those turn into these religions. And so Strauss, I think, would say, well, we always have to test these things, and we have to, we have to measure our beliefs, our ideologies by the facts, by logic, sensory-based experiences and insights. But Vogelin would say, no, that's not good enough, because you could reason all day with, like, they have COVIDians. What is that? People call the cult of COVID, like these COVIDians or whatever. You could try to present the facts all day, but they're not going to be persuaded. So it's not a problem just of facts. It has to be something else deeper, and it really is a kind of religious disorientation or misorientation that we're dealing with. And so, as I've looked, I was started investigating this kind of thing by looking at I started from a concrete event, the takeover of the University of Tulsa. Then I looked at what was going on in my city, and I I'll just say it very bluntly. I really think we're being colonized by Israeli venture capitalists who, at the top level of their organization or coterie, I think that these are people who are practitioners of a dark religion, and they use the same symbols over and over again, not only to communicate with each other, but also to sort of hypnotize the masses and to keep them living in an ideologically bound framework. So when I started looking into, some of the churches here in Tulsa, and Tulsa is just a weird place. We've got a lot of strange things going on here, but looking at these Christian churches, and you have this Noahide movement, like Jason mentioned, where you have people who were Christians, mainly of a Protestant bent, who have deified the state of Israel and the Jewish people, and I'm using those terms very broadly. Of course, they'd have to be qualified, but you have this willingness to subordinate themselves and their own reason to the good of Israel, and that's become a really important part of what's going on right now. I mean, and I'll just mention this quote that I came across on a webpage, and then I'll wrap it up. But a lady from Tulsa, who I think is a prominent woman in the business community, philanthropic community, she said, well, I can't remember if she said the Bible or the Torah teaches us that the Jewish people are a priestly people, and they need, in order to be priests, they need a level of followers, and we Noahides are going to provide that, those followers for this priestly people, and in that way we're doing our ethical duty, our religious duty, and being good human beings in the divinely ordered cosmos. And I thought, that is really strange. It's just like, with the Black Lives Matter movement, and you have all of these white people kneeling to black people, and I think this is self-loathing. Like, why are we doing this? We're all human beings. We're all on equal footing as far as like our natural, our nature, our human nature. So why do we have this desire to put ourselves below something and to reduce our rational capacity? So anyway, I think that's something that we're bumping up against.
And
It
real
is.
quick
It is
too.
a. It,
Go
sorry.
for it. Uh,
I think that it's an amazing discourse we are delving into. I kind of. It is so interesting for me that I started to write. I'm in my studio and I had to look for a pencil. I didn't use pencil 5 years.
That's I do
Paper.
that
We
too.
do everything. we don't do everything on computer. So to start with, I'm not at all Straussian.
Mm-hmm.
I have very little agreement with the guy, and I mentioned him just because he was the guy who delivered it to us in English. But
Yeah.
well, wasn't he
actually,
supposedly wasn't Strauss one of the major intellectual
influ- yeah,
influences of
of neocon.
neoconservatism?
Of course. I mentioned, of course. So I definitely don't follow Strauss, and actually, I don't agree with his vision of Athens and Jerusalem. Strauss believes um, that what we see, the evolvement of Western discourse or Western culture or Western thought um, um, is an evolution of a dialogue between Athens and Jerusalem. And I actually believe, and this is something that I was inspired to accept by my mother, who is a great philosopher. We are dealing actually with a vile war between the two. Now, when we think about when we think about the West, about what what is so precious for us in the West, it's we will say it's freedom of speech, it's tolerance, it's science, it's philosophy, it's art, it's beauty, architecture. All of that came from Athens. None of
Yeah.
that came from Jerusalem. Sorry, I'm shouting. None of that came from Jerusalem. When we try to understand what we managed to get out of Jerusalem, it's authoritarianism, intolerance, cherem culture, which is what we call now cancel culture, is cherem culture. And I want to just wanted the kneeling that you mentioned. I want to get to it in the end because I don't believe in it. I don't believe in it, and when I see these gestures at all, I'm not against people kneeling, but if they kneel, I want. What happened in the British football in the last week was the classic example. We will get to it in a second. Now, you raise a very important question. Um, and you refer to Voglin as the person who kind of raised this issue. How is it possible that Germany, 1930s, the most advanced culture in Europe, they write the best symphony, the best philosophy, the best mathematicians, the best physicists, the best in everything. Of course, the best cars and the best airplanes and even atomic bomb. They basically were there before everyone. Manhattan Project was all Jewish German scientists, except one's Italian, and they don't stand up, which is exactly what we see now. We see, it's embarrassing to see what is left out of medical profession. And if you are a philosopher, so you're probably familiar with Otto Weininger, and he predicted it already in 1902. But I'll get arrested for saying what he said. So people will have to search for it, either in my paper or in Otto Weininger himself. But the issue here is, despite the fact that the German National Socialism was inspired initially by early Romanticism, which was basically an Athenian instinct, despite the fact that there were so many German intellectuals who pushed in this direction, something dramatic happens in the Nazi party, and it becomes a Jerusalemite structure. Now, once you become, I'm basically, I'm basically saying that the person who destroyed National Socialism from being a kind of a revolutionary movement was actually Hitler himself, by introducing authoritarianism, and I'm probably upsetting a lot of Nazis at the moment, as if I don't have enough enemies, but but I'm really not my business. No, I don't have a business coach. So, but this is a crucial issue, and this is, by the way, why there were quite a few German intellectuals who supported National Socialism in its very early days, not because they were racist. They were the opposite. They believed that people find their way to the soil, to the land, integrate with the valleys, and by the way, it's elements of that were left kind of till the end in the Nazi movement. And another very important issue, all those elements, and we spoke about Zionism, all those elements existed in Zionism already in the late 19th century, 20 years before, and 20 or 30 years before the Nazi party was formed. All right, Zionism was born as a National Socialist, and I myself was raised in a National Socialist society. Maybe when we say National Socialist, maybe we should say Socialist Nationalist. So just to make sure that people don't are not confused here. So what is happening when we start to understand this war between Athens and Jerusalem? We have to accept that Jerusalem is very invasive, is domineering, and unless it is suppressed, it is prone to take over. And this is exactly what we see now. Now, when we look at the history of humanity, 99.9% of the time, we were abused. We were living in prisons. So, in that sense, what we see now is in COVID is homecoming. And by the way, you can see how many people actually like it. And one of the most interesting development is that the people who regard themselves left and progressives are most enthusiastic about it. People who used to talk about human rights and freedom and just they all want to, people who used to be against experiment on animals are now the first to queue to let these people experiment on their bodies and on their kids.
Yeah.
And I believe that this is a great lesson. We are living in the most incredible time. I think of my grandmother. They had a bit of World War. Just people dying. We have this great opportunity to watch this madness emerging in front of our eyes, to see the most catastrophic policies taking shape, and it's the best insight into the history of humanity. For instance, I was a soldier, and I could never understood. I was really afraid of the idea of a war, and people start to shoot, and what do you do then? And when it happened, I still didn't understand. I was just trying. I closed my eyes, and I wasn't even a hero. And I never understood the Battle of the Somme. I never understood the Battle of the Somme. How can 70,000 people go? It's more than 70,000 go to a battle with one bullet. What is it? Against machine guns. And when you see the way the Brits react to COVID, you understand it. It is something unique about these people. Why we have religion? We have religion because people want to believe. And this is something that you touched. Irrationality is not something that we have to defy. This is the most banal form of scienticism, an image of science. To be is to be irrational. And I just want to finish this point with an insight that I had in the last few weeks. We notice that most of our precious leftist and progressive friends talk more and more in slogans. They
Yeah.
don't commit to an exchange. They say Israel is apartheid. It's way worse. It's not apartheid. Or BDS is working. Or I follow the science, but the science is the complete opposite. Science is something supposed to be very open discourse and actually factually based, and we see the complete opposite. And then we also see that, and this is a fact, when I looked at January 6th, the Capitol Hill, and I looked at the revolutionaries there that were about. They could be my grandparents. They were all old. In the history, we never had revolutionaries over the age of 17. People get to age of 20, they want to buy a car. They don't want to die in a revolution. All right? And I started to think about it, and I understood that it is quite clear. We see it in Britain, in Brexit, in Trump. They are slightly leftists are always a bit younger. It come to the point that I realized that, like talk British terms, you are born Labour and you die Tory. For instance, I remember that there was a Brexit in Britain. They saw that the Labour supporters up to age 30, it was red, left, Labour, and over 45 they were blue and conservatives. And the Labour said, okay, if we didn't win this election or we didn't Brexit, the future belonged to us. No, what it really means is that you are born Labour and you die Tory. And I'm going to say the most simplistic thing, but this is the nature of the evolution of humans. When you are born, you are set, designed to be authoritarian. If you don't listen to your mother that tells you not to shove your face into the electric socket or to not to run the street, you are a mother. You tell your stuff with your kids when it is really needed. If you won't listen to your mother, if you be an authoritarian who doesn't question, that follows order, you want. When you come to school, if you won't listen to your teacher, learn the alpha, beta, the basic numerical structure, you will be defined as learning disabilities and your life will be finished. What is happening is that when you get to the age of 21 or 22 or sometimes 18, or if you go to the army and you see a war and it's not exactly what you believe war is all about, or you buy a car, you save the, and you buy a great car, and you were socialist until that point, but you really walked out for this car. Said, I'm not that I want to share this car with the entire neighborhood. It's mine. And this is the point where we start to become critical. This is why we see this. We are really upset by youngsters who do not think it is a normal process, and as they will grow up, they will start to ask questions. So it's pretty horrifying to see how intellectually paralyzed. You're a professor in university. You meet them. When I visit universities, which is something that I didn't do now, actually, COVID, but before, not a lot, just on Zoom. I was sometimes amazed, in my tours when I came to university, American university, British university. People really find it hard to think. And Jason, I was once in your city in Denver, and maybe you remember it. Maybe even you have it on a video. And a
Oh yeah.
very clever guy. He was sitting in the end of the room, and he said that something is uniquely wrong in American universities. When I knew that A was the right answer, but D would score me the points.
Mm.
Hmm.
This for me, this is something that I really remember. It was in Denver, because this pointed out to me, how many people, how many students would agree to admit. I'm not so sure that my kids would agree to admit. It takes a lot of, I thought, okay, this is a guy 25 years old. He's already kind of questioning what is happening. Criticism is something that comes with age.
Um, So we're breaking up a little bit, you guys. So I'm going to try something. If you guys have audio issues, just let me know and I'll switch it back. So I'm just going to make one quick adjustment because I'm um, trying to get the best sound as we can. Let's just go with that.
My internet here is not brilliant.
Yeah, it was kind of choppy. Okay, how's your sound? Just as this goes, if you guys have issues, just let me know. And one of the things I want to do with this discussion, because you guys are both come from like philosophy backgrounds, so I know that that could just like go off for forever, which is interesting, but I always want to pull it back to actual things that are actually happening. And so when I talked to Julianne about the Noahide thing, I was just like, okay, yeah, Noahide, okay. I'm not really, the reason why I mentioned that I'm not religious is just because I'm not in that world. I don't really know kind of what happens in that space. So, I tend to think of things within that space as kind of remaining in that space. And when I started looking at some of the articles that you were sending me, Julianne, um, I was noticing that there's actual reference to this in actual legislation. So that
Yeah.
kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit of like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, so this isn't just some internal thing that's happening within like Christian Zionists or whatever. This is actually like bleeding into legislation. So do you want to and I kind of hesitate because I don't want to like steer this if it's somewhere it'll go kind of interesting naturally. So we could even come back to that if we want, but I do want to kind of cover that at some point. But a lot of times I knew with this interview that I would largely be kind of a paperweight here, so because you guys, I figured you guys would just go, you guys would just go. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And so, Julianne?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I can take what Gilad has mentioned and sort of bring that around to the Noahide Law, which is something I am just learning about. So I am not at all, I'm not really confident even in my grasp of it, but it is something that I've seen enough of to know that it is important. Like you mentioned, Jason, it's in legislation. Uh, George H.W. Bush brings up the Noahide Law uh, in his term in office, in his presidential tenure. And then every president since has made some kind of affirmation about Noahide Law. And I'll explain what it is in just a minute. But just to kind of give you the lay of the land. So we have, like, our governor here in Oklahoma has signed a proclamation, a Noahide Law proclamation on Education and Sharing Day. And he presented some kind of a little, like an official certificate to the Chabad group here in Oklahoma. And we have a very powerful Jewish community here. We have several billionaires, who are listed on the Forbes list. I mean, Michael Bloomberg and George Kaiser and the Schustermans. Uh, they are investment partners in a group called Blue Meridian that does uh, early childhood impact investing and other kinds of impact investing programs. So, uh, Bloomberg came here to Tulsa, Trump came here to Tulsa, Biden came to Tulsa. I mean, there's a lot of activity going on here, and I think it has to do with this powerful Jewish influence and the oil business that at least two families made a lot of money in the oil business. And that kind of links us to Texas, too, which is where the Noahide movement really kicked off in the U.S. You had, I think it was in Fort Worth, and well, I would have to go back to check the date, but I think it was Fort Worth, Texas, is when you really see the first Noahide movements, and this was supported by the Bush family um, and so on. So we have, and there are many governors who are making these proclamations, and it's important that they are tied to education and sharing days, because I think I mentioned maybe in an email that here in the U.S., I think that we're going to see the COVID um, the COVID crisis sort of back off from the emphasis on the vaccine. I think, I mean, they've vaccinated a lot of people. They've accomplished many of their goals on that front already, but you're seeing this rising popularity, especially in red states, of governors pushing back and wanting to reopen the state and wanting to have health freedom. But in those same states, we're seeing a lot of education reform and workforce development initiatives that are rolling out. And so the Noahide Law, because it attaches especially to these education and sharing days, and because these red states are going to be revamping their economies to coincide with the workforce development plans that are part of Agenda 21 and managed economies, I think that we're going to see this huge cultural shift toward this, I guess you would call it like a civic religion, a new public religion it's a secular humanist looking religion on the face of it, because the Noahide laws, there are 7, and it's basically you need to, I forget how it is. I can look it up. I think it says you have to be respectful of God. You have to don't commit adultery, respect life. They're pretty basic. I'll see if I can pull them up here. But these 7 Noahide laws, they come from this Talmudic Jewish tradition, but they're framed in secular terms, but they're being implemented in a way that is going to make this sort of secular humanism have the status of a political religion. And I know I've got a lot of tangents going here, but I was just looking last night at some of the white papers on faith and belief institutes, and what's it called? It's the Institute for Faith and Belief, and Klaus Schwab actually is, some kind of a patron of this. But what many of these institutes are doing is they're trying to find a morality that gets away from reason and doctrine and emphasizes all of the buzzwords that we see: empathy, kindness, mindfulness, inclusiveness. So it's basically the UN global goals for people who style themselves more conservative-ish, and that's why we're seeing it in these red states. So that's a long and meandering like overview of Noahide law, but I think what ties it back to what Gilad was mentioning about the cancel culture and about this Jerusalemite, like, I'm going to use my phrase, prohibition of questioning. I think these two things go together perfectly. So Gilad mentions that the left and the progressives have basically stopped engaging in any kind of criticism of the current events, the current
Critical
handling
thinking.
of. I'm sorry.
So critical thinking completely.
Right. They have
Yeah.
stopped they've stopped thinking critically, and they have stopped criticizing altogether. They're just buying it hook, line, and sinker. And they get angry, actually, if you try to raise a question. So to me, that tells me that there is something. This is not just a problem of having the right logic, because you don't really get angry if someone makes a logical mistake. I mean, if someone's doing a mathematical problem and makes an error, that doesn't rouse your passions, right? Like, you only get angry if someone trespasses into an area where you don't believe they have the right to go, or if they're going into this area, like asking some question that challenges the dominant narrative. If they're they present a threat to you and how you have constructed reality to yourself. They pose a
Exactly.
threat to you. And so that's like this cause of divide, right? So you have I think we're seeing it in the left and also in the right. I mean, it's in every religion, it's in every ethnicity, every nation, every party, whatever. But you have this embrace of a lack of critical questioning. People have just turned their back against it. And that is what I think is appealing about this Noahide law that is rolling out. So you have a lot of Christians who I think, I mean, I'll just say it very bluntly, and I'm just trying to get to communicate clearly, but I'm going to say I think that they're afraid of actually living maybe like Jesus lived. Because the way that he lived it's unpopular. He was principled. He had integrity, like Socrates. He was principled, had integrity, and he paid the ultimate price for it, right? And so, you know, people who want to drive their nice car, like you say, they're they're willing to give up truth for a nice car. Um, Doctors don't want to question this scientism because they want to, keep their license to practice medicine. So if we see people who are willing to tolerate that level of hypocrisy, like they're really not going to stand up for something that might cause them to lose their life, right? I mean, I think that's a problem. It's a perennial problem, but I think especially in the contemporary era. And Alan Bloom is really good on this. He was a student of Leo Strauss. He wrote the book, The Closing of the American Mind. And he talks about this materialism, like our materialist outlook, and not just like consumerism, but a real materialist worldview, where we desire comfort most of all. I mean, we're like Nietzsche's last men. I mean, I think this is what you're seeing when you look at this Jerusalemite uh, psyche or outlook, is that we want to be comfortable, we want to have a sort of easy way, we want to get along, but it's at the expense uh, of integrity in our lives, and that is something that I think. I mean, I think it's evident in the faith and from my faith background, and then also from my philosophical studies. I think that human beings do desire to live a life of integrity, and they want their theory and their practice to match at a very deep level. Um, but when in practice those things don't match up, then we don't want to solve the real problem of figuring out if we want to live in an integrated life or not, but rather we'd rather cover up that little nagging urge that says, ooh, something is wrong here. And that's when you start to spin ideologies, and that's when you start to prohibit questions. So I think that these Noahide movements, you're we're setting up a new, we're setting up a new authority, a new God, and a lot of sort of lazy Christians are embracing this. And really, if you look at it, it's interesting because it's coming from these Pentecostal movements and spirit-led movements that are, they're anti-Trinitarian, and I'm talking in very broad terms, so you could always like pick apart these arguments, but these are the denominations that tend to um, really they don't have a Trinitarian view of the Godhead, and that works well with Noahide law, because Noahide law won't allow a Trinitarian outlook. Like, that would be a heresy. It would violate the first law. But these Christian groups, like in their Assemblies of God and their charismatic spirit-led denominations, they tend to suppress the fact that Jesus was described as the Logos, right? So in the Gospel of John, it begins saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So there's an order to God, and there's an order to Christ, and our access to these divine things must be sort of logical, grounded in reason, speech, and argument. Well, that's what Noahide law wants to get rid of. Instead, it's going to propose a way of treating each other and a sort of practical morality that makes us comfortable. Diversity, inclusiveness, empathy, kindness, all of these soft, comfortable things. And we're going to alleviate poverty, and people are all going to get to drive their nice cars. Oh, wait, except that we're not. We're going to be like geo-fenced and living in VR goggles, right? But I think that movement, the longing for the Noahide law, the openness to it, the failure to recognize that it's happening, all of that really goes to this fear of tackling these deep questions of the soul and whether we're living an integrated life or not. So, but we're seeing it roll out in practice. All the states are doing it, and from the just to mention, and then I'll wrap this up, the people who are bringing up this legislation, I mean, I think a lot of like the senators, representatives, they probably don't fully understand what's going on. But I think the powers at the top, and I mean like the billionaires, the social engineers who really are eugenicists, and I think a lot of them are Satanists. I never thought I would be talking about Satanism 2 years ago, but I think that they are. Um, those people who are orchestrating this introduction of the Noahide law and the sort of under the table imposition of it into U.S. law, like they are bent on domination. I mean, these are people who have a very powerful libido dominandi, and I don't know how you would explain them or what they're doing, but I think that they have appropriated the symbols of Zionism and the chosenness from the Torah, and they are using it to their own advantage. And unfortunately, people are not able to criticize that and to see through it and see it for what it is, which is a eugenicist totalitarian program. I'm sorry, that was probably too long and winding.
That's all
I'm
right. Well,
sorry.
one thing specifically.
I,
Go ahead, Gilad.
no,
I'll come
I
back later.
think that we already elaborated on very important issues, and we agree about Athens and Jerusalem. And I think that the one notion that we didn't um, define or looked into uh, is Jewish religion, and I think that if we look into it, this will help us to understand um, not just Judaism or Noahide law, but every other Jewish religions, and you can't imagine how many are there. Okay, Jewish religion, as I define it, is a precept that sustains chosenness. That sense of self-awarding greatness or self-appointing greatness. Now, once you understand that, you understand how free the Jews are, because as you probably know, most of the Jews whom you know are not religious. They are not, definitely not Orthodox. The Orthodox with you, but you know that a lot of Jews are around you, and you can't even see that they are Jews unless they tell you. Usually they'll tell you, but not necessarily. I go back to Yeshayahu Leibovich, that philosopher that I mentioned, I don't know, 30 minutes ago, and he actually said in the 70s that there are many Jewish, Jews believe in many things, many different things, but all Jews believe in the Holocaust. Now, when you start to look, what is the Holocaust religion as he saw it? And by the way, quite a lot of Israeli scholars try to define what are the Ten Commandments. What are the Ten Commandments of the Holocaust religion? It's quite amazing. Actually, I think that they came with 6 or 7 commandments. Yeah. So there is no Holocaust but the Holocaust. No one. It's basically primacy of Jewish suffering. But there are many Jewish religions. At one time, Bolshevism was a Jewish religion. And then enlightened egotism, Ayn Rand, was a Jewish religion. At one time, it became human rights, and so on and so on. And if you understand what Jewish religion is sustaining, chosenness, the sense of greatness, you understand that being progressive is the most natural form of Jewish religion. Progressive is, in practice, secular chosenness. You cannot be progressive unless someone else is a reactionary.
Yeah.
All right? And you are the progressive, is the reactionary. This is exactly the way Jews see the dichotomy between the Jew and the Goy. Gentile, Goy, yeah? All right? And even in the COVID religion, we started to see this form of elitism. We believe in science. You don't believe in science. You don't even know what science is. Science was actually introduced, progress, because of people like myself. Every scientific revolution was presented by a dissenter, by a person like yourself. A person who was willing to ask questions and to fight, to be heard. All right? We are the science. And it's not that great. Now, so once we understand that this is the issue, and that there are many, 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 many Jewish religions, and everything can become a Jewish religion once it is there to sustain a sense of chosenness, basically supremacy. In some Jewish religions, it's racial supremacy. In other Jewish religion, it's a sexual supremacy. Yeah, this is gender supremacy. This is feminism. Or sexual orientation supremacy. This is LGBTQ, or what? Basically, everything can become a Jewish religion once it is clear enough to set rules of engagement. And this, the case of the religion that you just spoke about, not the religion, is exactly following exactly this model, and it is just one amongst many. Now, we have to understand that, especially after emancipation, because emancipation happened in the 19th century, and in Europe, uh, starts around 1848, and it's evolving, kind of spreading to Germany, and even eventually even to Russia and so on. This is the moment in history, in Jewish history, when we start to come across the notion of the Jewish question. What is the Jewish question? The Jewish question is, what is the meaning of being a Jew in a world that is changing rapidly, and Jews are amongst those people who are losing their shtetl, their sense of ghetto, of being protected, of being isolated. And this is something that we have to understand. Jews always accused Goyim, and this is the way they like us to read their history. But they actually, when you look at the present time, you look at Israel, for instance, and you see what they built around themselves, you understand that the sense of living in a ghetto is something that is inherent to Jewish culture, is something that they really like. It is something that they really like. And to a certain extent, the early Zionists, um, 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 his name just the name of this um,
Not
it's one of the
Herzl.
streets in Tel Aviv. Anyway, no, it's definitely not Herzl, but it was second in command after Herzl. Um, um, Never mind. One of these prominent early Zionists said, kind of in maybe it's a very strong pamphlet, that our we lost our home. And when you think about Zionism, you describe what is happening in Oklahoma, where a lot of rich Jews, and they're very influential. They're very influential. And one of the things that Zionism, in that early stage, and I have some respect to this early moment of Zionism, was a promise to take the Jews away from Oklahoma, from New York, from Paris, from London, and to make them into farmer. It was a movement, and by the way, it wasn't the only movement. There were a lot of movements, like that were talking about the metamorphosis of nations. You could see the same thing is happening in Turkey and in Czech Republic. Something suddenly they find their language and they stop speaking German. It happens in many European nations at the same time. Late 19th century, early 20th century, they actually, Zionism was not just anti-Jewish in kind of in the anti-Semitic sense. It's actually tried to reject everything that is associated with with Judaism, and with Jewishness. And the truth of the matter is that it was extremely successful. And look how successful it was in 1948. I'm not talking about the Nakba, but the support of the nation. And the support of the nation continued despite the fact that they committed all those crimes against the Palestinians. Then, 1956, the Brits that were kicked from the region by the Israelis just 6 years earlier are coming back to fight with Israelis in the Suez Canal. So were the French. 67, Israel is admired by the entire universe. And it looked as if this Zionist project was successful. The Jews are proud people suddenly. They fight, they cultivate the land. Nobody really cared about the Palestinians at that stage. It is true. It's like very embarrassing, but We have to say it. And then within the next 10 years, Israel returned to be the Jewish state, which is a fascinating twist. And from that moment on, 77, the Likud is taking over, and Israel is the biggest ghetto, the Jewish ghetto ever. And now I took it a bit away from the religious concept, but again, you have to, because we are talking about Jewish religion, look how we take all our cues for COVID religion from Israel.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wouldn't, when you look at a specific Jewish precept, try to analyze it. Everyone, not just you, try to analyze it within the context of Jewish essential understanding, the Talmudic concept, the Jerusalem concept, the intolerance to otherness, chosenness as a central primacy of Jewish suffering. This is the Holocaust. Primacy of Jewish superiority. This, Wall Street religion, so on and so on. And when I promised to talk about this kneeling thing. I think that it's a beautiful thing when people regret something that they've done. I've never done anything wrong, so I don't have to regret anything. But no, of course, it takes a lot of courage to admit doing a wrong thing and so on and so on. The problem that we have is that even kneeling becomes a gesture of identification
Yeah.
rather than a genuine ethical awakening. And I understood it many years ago. I remember that when I came to do my studies, my philosophy studies in Britain, everybody spoke about post-colonialism, and I was impressed. Wow, are they really kind of?
Yeah.
They feel kind of they are so embarrassed about their past, and I thought that it was slightly peculiar because they are not embarrassed about something that they did. They kind of allegedly apologize for something that their grandparents did, or fathers,
Yeah.
or great grandfathers. Strange. And then 2003, the war, the second Iraq War, and all the Guardian and all the leftists, are kind of starting to change the mood, and it's the Labour government. And here we are starting a new colonial project, and most of the people who were so anti-colonial didn't say a thing. Now, what happened in Britain? What I don't watch football at all, but there was this kind of a world tournament, football, and I monitor the BBC and the Guardian. I read all these papers every day, and I'm not interested in football. I didn't watch a single game, but it was all about Britain. We are mixed color team, and blah 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 blah, and it's beautiful. And then what happened in the final game? That I don't know if it means enough for Americans. Nobody managed to win the game, so they do a penalties, and I don't know if Americans know because you have your own games. Anyway, and what really happened in Britain is that two or three of the colored players were actually missed the goal or something as such. And immediately everybody came with not everyone, but a lot of people became racially abusive. Now, what is so amazing is because the British team, had this facade of a multi-racial, and I'm not against it. I just what I believe is that when you speak about multi-racialism, where you celebrate the fact that you are multi-ethnic or whatever you want to call it, you actually bring to light, you sustain racial awareness. This is what the left is doing. In the old days, and I mentioned it in when I introduced myself, in the old days, the left said I was an Israeli, and the proper left said, listen, you are an Israeli, he is an Arab, you are brothers, you are human brothers. There is no issue. And this is very interesting to talk about it with a Christian fellow, because in Shalom Aleichem, who was kind of very, very important um, um, Jewish writer, there is a segment where a Jew, I won't get into the entire story, wants to marry is one of his many daughters to a Marxist, but not to a Christian. So Shalom Aleichem asked him, why do you want to marry to a Marxist, not to a Christian? Because Marxists, they want people to push for brotherhood, and Shalom Aleichem said, yeah, but Christianity is exactly about the same thing.
Yeah.
All right, Christianity is all about brotherhood. Now, the issue for me is that we have these values of brotherhood, of human brotherhood, in Christianity or in the left, and we replace them with the complete opposite, with sustaining differences so we can gain political, we can benefit from it politically. All right, this is for instance, the Democrat can also only survive if we keep America as a people who identify as a woman, as a Jew, as a Muslim, as a black, instead of identifying simply as Americans, and to deal with issues that are important for America, such as education, economy, health services, and so on and so on, manufacturing.
But see, I would
And
think, go ahead. I'm sorry.
sorry, no, 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 no. It's,
Well,
it's
I
the
mean,
right time to stop me.
I would think that maybe it's not for political reasons, though. I mean, the reason why you would spin these divisive, um, you know, narratives about diversity and inclusion, for example, like you mentioned, yeah, like
Yeah,
it. I think that those narratives probably, I mean, they reinforce this racial tension and maybe awareness of it, or um, the potency of that, but also they're a symptom of already having that attitude that we're divided, right? So you wouldn't have to go around. I mean, I'm thinking of Shakespeare. Methinks the oh dost protest too much, right? So there's already some kind of a problem and a barrier that makes us uncomfortable, really, and so that we have uh, that divide, and so we try to cover it up with language, but it is an untruth that is it is incongruent with, like, really the character of our soul, and then it also is reinforcing this thing that is unhealthy, the divide. But I think it's probably not for political power. Like, I think it's probably more about existential angst and needing to have that boundary, whether it's nationalism, whether it's the mask, whether it is the sexual identity or whatever. Um, Like, we need those fences because it is, for most people, I think it is just too terrifying to live like Socrates lived, or to live like Jesus lived, to be constantly asking these questions. So like you mentioned, well, we're born with this authoritarian, like this, um, like an openness to authoritarianism, like we have to have mothers tell us what to do. But but uh, we also have reason that does invite us. I mean, sometimes it just pushes us to question these boundaries that we're given for our safety or for whatever. So I think we have to think of human beings as like composites that we're in tension with ourselves. And so some people can look at that situation and they can sort of embrace it, like embrace the chaos. Like, okay, we're a lot alike, but we're very different, and I can't exactly reconcile those rationally, but that doesn't mean that I have to live a disintegrated life and, categorize some people as with me and others as against me. I think some people can look at that tensional aspect of our lives and be very open to it and still maintain a sort of point of orientation. But most people can't. And that is where these narratives of chosenness stem from. So I would say that like Americans have the same notion of chosenness, and probably the Brits too have the same notion of chosenness, and like, um,
Of
as
course.
as a Jewish people, and or as the Jewish religion, and it's all that's a very human characteristic. Now, maybe I think throughout history, the documents and traditions and artistic works that have defined the West. I mean, I definitely am with you. Like, I think Athens really was such a rich source of that, of our culture and what the West has become. But the Bible and the Torah, you can't underestimate that the influence of those texts on the Western psyche. And so, um, well, I lost my train of thought, but I think like we are using these symbols of like the Jewish people and this Jewish religious mentality, and we all have a sort of collective psychological disorder. And like you say, just wanting to put up like the barriers, wanting to wear the mask, wanting to say, no, I'm not going to question that. And anyone who does ask me to question that, I'm going to shut them out. And, I know Jason wants us to bring this back down around to practical things. So, here in the US, I don't know how many people are aware of it, but the First Amendment that protects free speech, it is on the chopping block. And we have Supreme Court cases right now that are chipping away at the First Amendment. Now, in our political religion, you have Americans say, "Oh, if they ever do that, everyone's going to rise up and pick up their guns and fight it off, and that'll never work." I mean, I hear this all the time. And oh yeah, the Anti-Bds legislation, which I think it's up to 35 states now. But I'm not sure if I sent you one with the Supreme Court case, but we have a lot of people who talk a big talk and say that they care about these rights, but they're in practice, in like fact, they are being chipped away at. And I think that no one is really fighting it because, like you say, we need a comfort zone. And right now, the First Amendment protects a zone of real criticism, of real scientific inquiry that most people are simply afraid to tolerate. So they're willing to get rid of the First Amendment. And if you look at what the World Economic Forum is doing, and some of these other think tanks that are um, pushing the reimagining of faith and religion, then they have switched to, there's a campaign that says it's called Faith for Rights. And it says we want our faith to support rights, political rights. And so there are a list of, I think it's the Beirut Declaration. There are like 18 points and it's a new religious creed, really. But it is a universalist morality that's going to supplant all revealed religions. And on the one hand, that sounds like you're going toward Athens, but actually I would say, no, that is the culmination of this perverted Jerusalemite
Of
chosenness
course,
view. And so
there.
you have people here who are like, they are just like giving up on the First Amendment because they would rather have everyone be nice to each other and not be confronted with real differences, like real factual cultural differences that could be a catalyst for dialogue, for understanding, for creativity. They want to suppress all of those and be equal and not be challenged in their own very low base view of chosenness. So that's what I think is going on. And I think that
There,
just one tiny thing, I just want to say, like in talking about this, I do think there's a spectrum of people. So especially like when we're talking about Jewish people, like I think there are many levels of awareness and devoutness and things like that. So I just want to be make note of that and say that it's not. I don't think it's categorical.
I
Whatever.
definitely don't think that it's the the Jewish is a category that designates certain characteristic to certain people. I'm criticized often for ignoring the racial or biological issue because I ignore it. I don't deny it. I just don't enter this issue. You saw my talk with Rabbi Shapiro. What I'm saying, instead of asking what Jews are or what are their characteristics, this is something that I never do. I ask a question that I find actually more interesting. I ask, what is it that the people who identify themselves
Yeah.
as Jews adhere to? Now, if
Hmm.
you're a Jew and you don't fall into this category, bye bye. You're not part of my research. And uh, these are what I mean. I define it into three categories. And one of the things that I didn't write in my book, The Wandering Who, and maybe if I should be more clear about it, is that those categories that I define, people who identify with the religion, people who identify with the with
Nation state.
ancestry, my grand, yeah, and obviously people who identify with politically. I say that people who identify with ancestry are completely innocent. If you say my grandmother is Jewish, it doesn't make you into a war criminal. People who identify with the religion are innocent. We can see some Jewish groups. Shapiro is one example. Satmar and Turkata, they are not involved in crimes in Palestine, just in Kiryat Yoel. I don't know if it's crimes, but it's not nice what they're doing there. But I argue that people who identify politically as
Yeah.
Jews, and this is both in the left and in the right, are very problematic for me because they identify politically as a race or with their biology. And this is very problematic. One thing that we really managed to skip, and it is very important, I assume that Jason will like to send us to bed. I mean, me, I'm a few hours ahead of you.
No, I'm
You
enjoying
just
the
start today.
conversation. I just like
Yeah.
I always want to kind of bring it back to actually what's actually happening. So, but we can get there. We have time.
So
I'm totally fine with this.
this is no, it's just start to get I have a bicycle ride 7 o'clock in the morning, but it's night here. But the one thing that we really missed, because we are both philosophers, is the practicality of that domination.
Yeah.
And it's a very it's they are very gifted in mobilizing support through banks and lobbies and some people will say now pharma industry and so on and so on. And I think that people tend not to talk about it,
Yeah.
but it is really important to look into this issue, because when you look at the cultural assets, some of it is in the Bible, even like the book of Esther, which I recommend everyone to read. It's like 2, 3, 4 pages in the Bible. You can find it on the internet, and this is actually a book that teaches people how to infiltrate into power, through bed.
Yep.
This is what Queen Esther did. Now, when you look
Mhm.
at Clintons, they married to Mesvinsky. When you look at at Trump, we have Kushner. And I didn't look into it, but somebody told me that Biden, for his kid or something, they're already married. Now, this is the book of Esther in
Yeah.
practice. America is married
Mhm.
to Israel. Nobody speaks about it. And but in the
Yeah.
case of Clinton with Kushner, it was really amazing because they were both married to Jewish felons. Both Kushner and Mesvinsky were in jail.
Hmm.
All right, nobody
Yeah.
speaks about it. It's frightening. Now, but it's not that the Jews do it. There is a segment, a very small segment within this community that do it. Was Kushner the boy followed the book of Esther? I don't know. I don't know if it works, but this is the most joyous book in the Israel. Even people who are completely secular Jews, they celebrate Purim. Okay, this is one thing. The other thing, they are not they, but Jewish elite is extremely gifted in certain things, and this is something that
Yeah.
people don't know. It is already 1500 years that they explore this exercise, exceptly European Ashkenazi Jews, if you can talk about Ashkenazi Jews for 1500 years, European Jews. In the Jewish ghetto, they tended to marry the protege genius, really young rabbi, promising brain, with daughter of the richest merchant. They
Huh.
basically created an elite community that was specializing. A lot has been written about it. I wrote about it in Being in Time, and I produced all the sources. They created an elite community that is specializing in scholarship,
Yeah.
specific scholarship, Talmudic scholarship, and Mammon.
Mhm.
And this is exactly what we see when they are emancipated and are free to deal with the world. This is when the Rothschild and all those families of Jewish bankers coming up. and they are still very influential. So it's not on that on these fields, and it is not just uh, when you look, for instance, even on Israel or Palestine in 1936, we have the Avara Agreement. Maybe the Avara Agreement even started earlier, maybe in 1933, where the German Jews could immigrate to Palestine. It was a deal between the Nazi Party and the Zionist organization. And in fact, German Jewry were the most sophisticated Jews, because the Jews from the East were sent to Germany. This was the center of both education. Germany, Prague is Central Europe, center of both education and commerce for the Jewish world. So 1936, many of those Jews immigrate. I myself studied in in Tel Aviv University. I studied math and philosophy with those Germans. This is the reason when I came to England, people thought that I'm German. My sentences were so convoluted. 7 lines of for one sentence. I was writing like a German. Yeah, if you really want to get into the essence of the, I spoke like a German. I thought like, I would, and somebody told us when we studied, in Tel Aviv University, one of our professors told us, you realize that this is Tel Aviv and Jerusalem were the last German universities in the world, because after there was de-Germanization, they couldn't be Germans. But in Israel, we were Germans for many more years, and it's a very interesting, nobody speaks about those issues. So we are really dealing with a society with great education and a very sophisticated elite. And I'm telling you now the most frightening thing in the Jewish world, there is a clear partition, total partition between the elite and not the working class, the underclass. The elite were in Germany, the underclass were in the East. If you look at the song, If I Were a Rich Man, the original, If I Were a Rothschild, this is how it was written. When they made it into a musical, they changed it, If I Were a Rich, they identified with their elite. The underclass identified with the elite. So it was something, if you think about, philosophy, if you think about Hegel, master slave dialectics.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of inspiration for that Jews in the East, to come up and to become like Rothschild, if I were Rothschild, so
That is so interesting.
nobody
Because
speaks about those issues, and and I speak about them, and this is why they really try to silence me, but because one of the first thing that I said today, Jewish power is the ability to silence questioning Jewish power, and it's a very sophisticated matrix.
Well, I know we're probably trying to wrap this up, but just I was just reading about how in the mid 1800s there were a lot of German Jewish entrepreneurs who came and settled here in the U.S. and really established businesses and influence along the Mississippi
Yeah,
and Ohio rivers. And from there, you see the American Zionist movement spread out. And I had always wondered, what is it with? I could see these practical connections between Oklahoma and Ohio, and I was like, what is it with Ohio? That place it's like a cesspool, of impact investing and totalitarian schemes and IBM. And And why is Tulsa and Oklahoma like just related? But there is that historical movement that people don't really mention, and that's that there was a large influx of German Jewish businessmen who came and set up shop and were very successful, and and really, I think people around envied them and tried to copy them as much as they possibly could, although these families were so far advanced in the things that you mentioned that they were never going to catch up. And now we have this political religion here of you know loving Israel and needing to bless Israel. And I think people are all confused about their concepts. They need to figure out what these things mean, but they don't have the energy or the stamina, or, to try to investigate those things. I think probably
I'm
because of
not
the
not
obstacles set up by the criticism, like there's this prohibition of questioning, that's also firmly entrenched in our psyche.
There is a film that I recommend you to watch. I just look for it on YouTube. House of Rothschild. Have you ever seen this film? It's on
No,
YouTube.
I have not. Okay.
House of Rothschild. It's from 1934. And if you survive the first 10 minutes of it, you are immune. You'll never need COVID. You you will know everything you need to know. Now it is a film that was made by as far as I remember, it's an Hollywood film. It was made by a Jewish director, I think German, and it comes to explain why the Rothschild behave the way they behave. But when you see I remember that when I saw it the first time, I just couldn't take it after the 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 first 10 minutes. Was it's like when you watch Larry David for this the first time, curb your enthusiasm. But you eventually you kind of get accustomed to this kind of behavior. Um, Very very important film to watch, especially the first 10 minutes. But it's a film that deserves a
Hmm.
PhD, at least one.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So
Jason, I see that you
I'll
want
I'll
to
take a
say
look at that.
something.
But before we go, I want to actually kind of talk a little bit about. And by the way, on Facebook, I noticed that it says that there's 18 comments, but it only shows me 4. So Facebook, if there's maybe people asking questions and whatnot that I did see something and then it disappeared. So Facebook shenanigans, whatever. So I
Oh my God.
apologize if I'm not getting to your things, but I'm not seeing them.
Yeah.
But I wanted to kind of bring it back. One of the things that I found interesting when I was talking to Julianne was, and Gilad, you've had some criticisms of the BDS movement in the
Yeah.
past, but kind of what's happened now is all this anti-BDS legislation that's happening around the country, and you know talking to Julianne, she was saying she believes that the BDS and the anti-BDS are actually related, and that there's a connection there. And so you want to talk a little bit about that, and then also too,
I could
just
see that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
go for it. Yeah,
No, 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 no. I noticed. I refuse to believe that somebody else is seeing it. But when I spoke about it with some of my Israeli friends, came with this theory quite a few years ago. You have Shamir. You definitely know Yoav Shamir,
yeah,
Jason.
yeah,
He's the guy who made defamation.
yep.
And I told him, listen, man, he said, of course it's connected. This is for to control the opposition is a national sport in this
Yeah.
for these people. Now, I obviously realize that I'm not against. When see people say I'm against BDS, I'm not against boycott or sanctions of Israel, but there was something that disturbed me from the very beginning about the fact that we're actually interfering with freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And this, I said, who is the person who is going to decide who can talk or who cannot talk? And it is very Jewish. This is the cherem culture. This is something that called in Judaic terms cherem de Rabbeinu Gershon. Yeah, it's something that is uniquely Jewish, and it didn't take too long before we started to see BDS operating against George Galloway, and I assume that you know he is in America, uh, and myself and Alison Weir and some great voices, because they said something that some Jews do not like. I then started to look into it, and then I found out in 2011, they changed it by now, that the BDS had three prime goals, and the first goal was occupation of all Arab lands. And then in 2011, it changed against all Arab lands occupied in June 67. So basically, they gave up on 48. And check it out. I couldn't understand why it happened. And then an American institution asked me to review a strange book written by a woman, American academic called Sarah Schulman. And the name of the book was The Palestine Liberation and Queer International. And I started to read it, and there was kind of zero academic value, but at one stage I came across a very interesting story that happened around the time that I noticed this change, and it was this is the story, and on my page you can find, if you really want, I can produce the quotes. So this Sarah Schulman wanted to make a BDS tour, a gay BDS tour in America, to bring Palestinian gays to America, as if Palestine, the situation in Palestine is about the liberation of libidinal liberation. There are some other issues that we have to deal with. And she needed, I don't remember how much, either $30,000 or 50,000. I don't remember exactly, and it doesn't matter. Somebody told her, why don't you call the Soros Foundation Open Society Institute? She called the Open Society Institute. She ended up talking to a friend of her that she knew very well, and this friend told her, call Amman, our office in Amman. She calls the office in Amman, and the office in Amman tell her, listen, we will get you the money because it will help us. This is not verbatim, but I can find the exact quote, and I'm not too far, I can assure you, because this will help us to promote gay resistance in Egypt, Iran, and maybe Jordan. I don't remember. And then I thought, this is so great. So we have Jewish money from Soros coming to Amman and back to America in order to promote a gay revolution in Arab countries. This is the time where BDS had to change and to fit. Now, there is nothing more effective than controlling the opposition. And this is something that we see constantly, not just BDS, from Jewish groups in the Palestinian solidarity movement and in every solidarity movement that they are getting involved with. Black Lives Matter. Of course, Black Lives Matters. But as soon as Black Lives Matter start to say something that they don't like, it's a big scandal. Every solidarity, the solidarity with the Russian people, Bolshevism, the liberation works until the Russians said, actually, we don't like the idea of the Bund. We want to be all equal, not just we equal and then there is the Bund, the Jewish party. It always comes to the same crisis. When it comes to Palestine, they have managed to dominate the and occupy this movement to the point that the discourse of the oppressed is defined by the sensitivities of the oppressor. I cannot say it in any clearer form. And the way they did it, they taught the Palestinians that instead of talking about the right of return, which is the most crucial Palestinian issue, this is the Palestinian cause, they start to speak about end of occupation. What is end of occupation? End of occupation is the acknowledgement of Israel being in Palestine. They start to talk about two states. They start to talk about apartheid. Israel is not apartheid. Apartheid is a racist system of exploitation. This is not Israel. Israel wants the Palestinians gone. It's an ethnic cleanser. It's far worse. And so on and so on. So the domination has been terminological, and this is okay. I'm going back. I just 10 minutes ago mentioned that they have a very sophisticated elite. Not many people have very sophisticated elite. The British had very sophisticated elite. They developed it for many years. This was the British aristocracy. Not that I'm supporter of the aristocracy, but it was a very selective community. America had a slightly sophisticated elite, the WASPs, and it is gone now. It's destroyed. The British aristocracy is destroyed, and the Palestinians had an elite. Palestinians been throughout their entire history under occupation. It's not the Israelis are not new to the Palestinians; they are just more vicious. Yeah, but before the Israelis, it was the Brits, and before the Brits, it was the Turks, and their elite was unique in a sense of an occupied nation. They were there to negotiate, to find a way to compromise, to find way to appease the rulers, and so on and so on, to provide soldiers for the Turks, to provide maybe olive oil for the Brits. I don't think that they know what to do with olive oil, and so on and so on. Okay. It's not a kind of elite that at an early stage could fight, could battle, could win the Israelis, but something changed. Why it is changing now? Because the Palestinians in Gaza are living now in really open air prison. And when you are in a prison, the people who are dominant are shining. When you go into a prison, within 10 minutes, you know who is the strongest guy, who is the clever, you know, we are going. I'm saying it because I saw some films and I read some books. I never been, I never been arrested in my life, but I assume, you know, I'm kind of using my imagination. It will come, but it's coming to me. But this is a really crucial issue. And in Gaza, look what is happening now. Nobody can build tunnels like the Gazans. They build rockets out of nothing. They are winning in every round of violence. They're winning. They're losing a lot of people, but they feel victorious, and they are now starting. I start to believe that their elite is way more sophisticated than the Israeli clumsy clumsy regime. So we started from BDS. BDS has less and less impact on the region. I don't think that it scored something. It actually played to the ends of the Israelis, and it is very, very sad because it could have been a great movement if it would be genuine and run by people who are committed to the cause.
Yeah.
Well, also too, but we, so now we have the anti-BDS. So you want to just say a couple words real quick about that?
M-
Either of you?
Me,
Myself?
Jason? Yeah.
Either of
Well,
you.
I
It's
can
fine.
take
Yeah,
that one if so,
yeah, yeah.
so it's interesting to see how the BDS movement has taken hold here in the States and then transformed into this popular anti-BDS movement. So you have, and I think that that actually might have been the purpose of promoting the BDS movement here, because now we have 35 states in the union that have passed anti-BDS legislation. And like you say, it is totally repugnant to the First Amendment, which should be, if we're talking about our civic religion, that should be the most sacred like
Mm.
principle. But you have 35 different states who passed these laws curtailing any kind of, you know, um, speech like with your money about Israel. And I mean, I don't think I've seen any other legislation that specifically protects a foreign country, you know, or a religious designation. I don't know how you want to um, describe this movement, like the whatever the anti-BDS is in support of. I don't know if it's like Israel or the Jewish people, or they're probably just fudging on all of it. But anyway, I think that that has been calculated here to play on the Americans' sort of naive glorification of the state of Israel, which they equate with the biblical people. And now we're moving into a time of intensive monitoring of hate speech, and that is, I mean, I think that that was one of the purposes of COVID, was to move us into virtual realms and put all of our conversations on the web and over technology so that it could be monitored. And now we're seeing, these different identity politics groups talking about the language of victimization, and everyone is a victim. So we all have to be monitored to make sure that no one gets hurt or no one's feelings are hurt or whatever. Um, so while we're rolling out all of this monitoring, just before that, because this legislation was being passed before COVID, now it is illegal in many American states to use your voice to criticize Israel. And
Well, and
and
not just Israel, but like Israeli, companies,
businesses.
right?
Yes. And so when we look at Who is going to win after the economic demolition that is COVID? That's a corona apocalypse. That's what I like to call it. It's going to be these Israeli tech firms and Israeli pharmaceutical firms and startups. So, here we see the Israeli tech ecosystem consolidating, and we have industrial parks that are basically supporting Israeli uh, companies, whether they're aerospace or medical or whatever. We have different nonprofit sectors that are going to control the re-education of human capital. And I think it's taking people a long time to realize this. But when people do realize, okay, here we have emerged with a totally different looking economy. Now we're in the fourth industrial revolution. And who is calling the shots? And we're going to see it's all of these Israeli startups, and it will be illegal to criticize those. So, so we have 35 states. That's enough for a constitutional convention. And really, when you talk about moving into communitarianism, and that's another discussion we need to have, about um, communitarian theory, especially coming from Etzioni, a guy who was brought to my attention by Nikki Rapana. As we move to this new social compact of communitarianism, and it goes by under inclusive capitalism here, uh, we're going to be unable to to criticize, to use a political voice. I mean, this is really the destruction of our rights and liberties, and those are protected by the Constitution. But as we move into this communitarian system, you have to really chip away at people's ability to criticize and to demand the protection of their rights under the old system. I think the Anti-Bds is designed to do that, to move us away from constitutional rights and freedoms toward the balancing of individual rights with the needs of the community. That's going to be this new compact between businesses and government and the American worker. And I think it's happening in Europe too, but especially here, you have to get rid of free speech. And that's why we see the right to religion that's coming from some of these think tanks that are associated with the World Economic Forum. They're talking about rights or religion that defends rights, but it's actually, that's double speak, because they're saying we're going to get rid of the First Amendment that protects free speech, and we're going to list 18 points in the Beirut Declaration that governs how we ought to act toward each other. And so it's really giving you the rules of behavior that you have to follow. It's pretty scary stuff.
And you felt that was
want to.
kind of
I
like the
want.
Noahide.
Yeah.
Just real quick, that was so in some ways that it's kind of like it's almost like Noahide law through like anti-BDS. It's in some way Noahide law. Is that what you were?
Yes, and I think that this is a sort of distinctly American um, phenomenon, or, I think say in Europe, they're much more receptive to the global goals, and here in the States, like the progressives, they're fine with the global goals. But you do have a large percentage of Christians and conservatives, like they style themselves that, and they would not readily embrace those global goals because it signifies progressivism and globalism and technocracy and things like that. But if those global goals were attached, if they were made to look like some kind of religious mandate, a religious, I don't know, set of principles that came from Israel, from the Jewish people, for whatever that means to Americans, then they would be much more likely to embrace it. So they I think that the laws that prevent us from criticizing Israel, that plays on the same love affair that American Christians and conservatives have with Israel. So that, they love Israel so much that they're going to be willing to get rid of their free speech. It's that same urge that's going to um, have us look the other way when Noahide law is proposed here as a way to reform, say, the educational systems that have been broken by the same people who are going to fix them.
Well, and they've even mentioned specifically mentioned Noahide law in some of the
Oh
legislation.
yeah.
Correct.
Oh yeah.
I was
mean, they
trying to
say
find it, but I couldn't find the. I found some
you
different.
can
But
look.
I actually think, and maybe I'm completely wrong. I'm not American, and I'm not so sure that I understand your country at all. But I have a kind of a similar intuition into the creation of BDS. Now, if I would be an Israel tactician, and in a certain turning of event, I was destined to become one. I just didn't work out. There was ethics. It interfered. It's always interfering. If I would be a strategist for Israel, and they have good strategists, you have to understand it is, they on Monday at 10 o'clock they meet. A person come from the foreign ministry and from the Mossad, and if they need, they will take an academic that specializes in American university. They know how to produce those kind of colloquium of brains. I would push Palestine to take a battle, or my enemy in general, to take a battle where they don't stand a chance. I believe that BDS in itself is an interference with the First Amendment, and the way it was presented, the way it was operating, and the anti-BDS was something that was very, very easy to sell to the American people.
Right.
All right. So I think that they were pushed into this trap, and they were very noisy. I was very, very embarrassed. I must admit, I was very embarrassed that when there will be a concert of an Israeli strings quartet, and I have zero, you never see me in these concerts. I don't know they play Brahms or whatever, and then 10 old Jewish activists stand up and start to shout at it. It didn't reflect greatly on the Palestinian movement. Now, these were not Palestinians. These were the Jews, the Jews in the movement. This is the way they call themselves. I feel as embarrassed when I see an Israeli spokesman whom I despise, giving a talk in university, and suddenly there is kind of, the same kind of performance. This is not the way to promote a battle. If you really want to fight, in 1936, a lot of Jews went to fight in Spain. You want to fight, go to Gaza and fight, destroying freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Sacrificing America on this kind of internal Jewish dispute altar is a disgusting situation, and I think that some people in Israel were clever enough to understand it and to pull the strings. And obviously, I know a lot of stuff that I'm not willing to share with you, because this could be very dangerous for the people, who are involved. But I think that there was an element of of treason here. But it's down to the Palestinians to sort themselves their discourse out, and I think that they are doing actually a good job. I think that judging by the level of depression in Israel, thanks to COVID, thanks to the buses, thanks to the barrage of thousands of rockets. These rockets, I'm very happy that these rockets are not like, I'm moving one step further. Jason, sorry about it. I'm not the kind of a person who want to see carnage and a lot of people dying. Just the fact that the Hamas has managed to deliver such a message to the Israelis, and the Israelis know that in the next time it could be both Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. It's not nice. It's not nice. It's not something that you want to live in. And it's a clear message to every Israeli who has brain on his shoulders. This is not the place to raise a family. This is not, we are living on someone else's land. And it's very unfortunate, because when I was a youngster, I really believed that we could reach peace, because this how I understood the Zionist dream. The Zionist dream, for me, to be people like all other people. That's what they told us. People like all other people. You can have a fight, but there is reconciliation, and you live in harmony. And then I realized that in the Hebrew word, shalom doesn't mean harmony or reconciliation. Shalom means security to the Jews. When they have shalom negotiation, they don't ask how to they don't try to reconcile. All they do is trying to secure their borders. It's measures of Jewish measures of Jewish security. This is the issue, and it's deep cultural thing, and this is why the Zionist revolution didn't work out. That's what it is. That's what it is.
Well, I'll say something too. Earlier, you mentioned, about funding Palestinian gay groups and whatnot, and someone watching this might be like, oh, what side am I on? Gay rights, and that's kind of missing the point. It's not about whether
Of
you are
course.
for or against gay rights. It's this is a useful tool to create disruption, and to they're basically exploiting the gay rights movement or gay rights issues for another cause. They don't, George Soros doesn't give a shit about gay rights. Like, even though he funds a lot of that stuff, he doesn't care about Black Lives Matter, but those are useful means to an end. And just like a lot of the what was the band in the Russia, the punk band, all girls, and they got arrested in Russia.
Pussy Riots.
Pussy Riot.
Is it
Yeah,
Pussy
so
Riots?
they
Yeah.
got a lot of support, and it was like the people that were
Yeah.
supporting them, the financial support they were getting weren't because they cared about Pussy Riot or their causes. It's a destabilization mechanism.
Yeah.
Just like with these color revolutions, they want to pull as many groups
Yeah.
into it, and they'll promise everybody, whatever they want. Yeah, we're going to help you do this, and we're going to, look at the Iranian revolution and all the groups that got shafted after.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. This wasn't a comment about gays and
Yeah, I
gays'
just wanted to
right,
clarify. I knew it
but
wasn't.
I realized, of course, and I realized that this is probably took place in 2008 or 2009 or 11, and at the time, Operation Cast Lead, the Palestinians were under so much stress, and the gay issue, which is maybe an issue in Palestine, wasn't the prime Palestinian concern as a nation.
Yeah, they're
All
getting
right,
bombs dropped
and
on
it
them.
will you go to the point that for 30,000 dollars, sorry, $30,000, you give up on the right of return if this was the case. By the way, and I won't mention the names, but when I realized that they compromised on they removed the all Palestinian land and put 67 in their goal. I spoke with a person whom I regard as the most sincere Palestinian academic activist. He thought that I'm making it up. He thought, Gilad, I supported you all those years, but now this is really, you are mad. I told him, listen, man, it's in front of me. Do me a favor. And then he looked and said, oh my God, you're right. Oh, it must be a typo. So I told him, all right, so fix it, do whatever you need. And he came, I called 2 weeks later. I said, oh, don't go there, don't go there. They say that it means the same. So I went to this number 2 Palestinian academic, most devoted, and blah, blah, blah. And it was more or less the same story. And by the way, I don't speak with these 2 people, and they don't speak with me anymore because they know that they compromised. And I know that it's a very embarrassing situation.
Yeah.
It's a very embarrassing situation. It is very, very sad. But as I said, there is a new leadership in Palestine, and some very very clever Israeli strategists say, if we really want to solve the situation in Gaza, we have to make Gaza into haven. It's like we have to invest every spare money that we have to put into this place to make industries there, to make, but they do the opposite. They do the opposite. And if they're clever enough to understand it, the fact that they don't do it means that they have issues to solve with themselves. And these issues are not going to be solved. And by the time they are solved, they won't be themselves.
Yeah, and so it's this interesting conversation because there's so many different layers to it. There's what's going on
Of
with the
course.
Palestinians, and then there's the issues of identity and religion and all that. And the thing that I'm actually most interested in having more conversations about, especially right now, the timeliness of it is just the fact that we have these massive new systems that are coming online around what they would call the fourth industrial revolution or whatever. But the role that everything that you've been talking about for years, Gilad, the role of that plays into this whole new global order. There's a coup taking happening on a global level where they're changing,
Yeah.
monetary systems, healthcare systems, education systems, like in a major fundamental way. And the role that these Israeli companies have, I mean, it's a very significant role in this whole system. I mean, it may even, I don't know to what degree that is, but it's certainly to a high degree. And so I kind of was, yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
Question to you. Do you know how Jews referred to America in the 19th century? You probably don't. I'm not ever going to. I'm about to tell you. They used to call it Golden Medina. Medina is a state. The Golden State. America was the promised land.
Yeah.
All right? So America is now the promised land.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think
you're not even producers. It's not that they bring factory to you. They
right.
just, you are consumers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, also,
Well,
earlier
it's
I
all
thought
a
about
fiction.
City on the Hill too, real quick. Just the City on the
Yeah.
Hill. Is that related into any of this? But go ahead, Julian.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
think it does. I mean, that's the American exceptionalism and these puritanical movements that really want to go back to um a certain interpretation of the Hebrew scriptures and this idea of chosenness. I mean, really I think that to move into the fourth industrial revolution, you have to change hearts and minds, and you have to do that by giving people a new religion. And so it's going to be a sort of smorgasbord of, here in America, because I think because we have military power, we have a lot of land, we have, people who have a certain habit of working that is going to really comply well with these fourth industrial revolution industries. Where was I going to go with that? I think, okay. So I think that the religion that's going to bring us into the fourth industrial revolution here is going to be a sort of worship of an idea of Israel and also of money. So there you go. What did you say? The two things that they were? Oh, they did it through, when you were talking, Gilad, about the Book of Esther, and you said that it was the worship of what, Mammon, and using the bed and using Mammon. Like, that's, I think, what we're going to see really happen here in the States. We're going to see people who are in love with this idea that they have of Israel and this blessedness, the city on a hill, and they want to be the ones to fix the world. So really, it's like you want to be God. And I have shared a graphic that says what gives people the most feeling of empowerment. Is it money? Is it status? No, it is the feeling that you're contributing to positive social change. That makes people feel the most empowered. It's like you are doing good in the world. So you have these, I think you have these elites, these Israeli elites, and I think that they're terrorizing the people of Israel just as much as they are terrorizing other, people throughout the world. But you have this very intelligent group of elites who have identified this motivating factor, especially for Americans, to create positive social change. And they are offering you the program of social change on a platter. And because Americans naively love Israel, like conflating it with the biblical people, then they're going to adopt this program of radical social change, not even realizing that it is curtailing their freedom of speech, of thought, of action, of anything. So that's going to be our new political religion here, and also this economic development. Now in Europe, I think it might be a little bit more complicated, how that'll work. I think actually the green agenda and then economic development, that'll be how it goes in Europe. And it's interesting, something Gilad mentioned way back about this connection to the land and as a feature of Zionism and this nationalism. Well, if you look at some of the Zionist symbolism, like the tree of life symbolism, it's all very entrenched in the green agenda. And so it is maybe more secular. I mean, the symbols are secular, but it's still a religious movement, just like the American sort of Old Testament Israel worship is a religion. But I think that those two new religions are absolutely necessary for moving us into this dystopian world of, dealing with robots and being locked up in our little storage pods and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes back to, like you take it back to the Greeks, and this is the Trojan War, really, and so you have the Trojans that are sort of mystical, royal priestly people, and then you have these warlike, very physical Greeks, and it's the clash of the two. And I think right now we've been maybe living in the era of Greek triumph for a while, but now it's time to switch back to the Trojans. And in this case, these Kabbalists, Israelis, financiers, whatever they are, they're going to be the ones that are setting the new dogmas. And if you do not follow that dogma, then with the surveillance technology, I mean, you're going to be cut off from society. It's not very nice to think about.
Yeah. One and
Yeah,
it's
I think.
written. Go ahead.
No, I'll have to leave you pretty soon because
Yeah.
I have to wake up very early. It's late here. It's like it's midnight. But
Yeah, we're
I think
pushing
that
3 hours too.
Yeah, it's been a long
yeah,
show.
it's like
I know.
no, we could. I don't mind. I don't mind to continue tomorrow, but anytime. But I think that we cover a lot.
Yeah, we did.
We really
I
cover.
appreciate
Yeah.
that.
We
And I
really
think it's
cover
a
a lot, and
I think it's a conversation that
you're
needs to
doing great job.
continue.
Yeah,
I think it's a
yeah.
conversation that
I'm.
needs to continue because I think that we're actually a lot of these, rather than it's not just a let's have a philosophical or historical discussion about these things. There are things that are happening in real time right now that relate to this, and I eventually kind of want to, start bringing that into it. So
By the way, have you noticed? And I'm sure that Julian noticed, and I'm sure that you also noticed, Jason. And I think that everyone who is kind of intellectually inclined noticed there are no philosophers. There are no people who think freely. Maybe Peterson, and just very, very few. And by the way, you could see how popular it was or is. Um, and the reason that we don't have philosophers is because philosophy is from Athens and Athens is defeated. What is philosophy? Philosophy is an attempt to dig into essentiality, into
Yeah.
understanding, the understanding of what things are. And this is exactly where we don't want to go. We will tell you what
Right.
things are. We'll tell you what COVID is. We don't want you to go to try to look into it. We will tell you what is the meaning of life. You know, something I said that I want to go and that I have to go, but I really have to go. A lot of my friends now are, and they will be upset with me if they see it, but they I heard it from few people kind of in the last few weeks, and you probably in America, you maybe in the last 2 3 years, they've kind of business coaches. Have you heard about people who are
Yep.
taking business coaches? Now, in
Hmm.
most cases, the business coaches are members of the same tribe. And what they teach them is not how to, when I was young, there were people who were going to India to gurus to find the way to life, the meaning of life. They teach them how to market their nonsense, how to
Yes.
get money
Yes.
from other people. We
Yes.
are all
The
becoming
sophist.
yeah, we are all becoming Jerusalemite, materialized. It's not about production. My father wasn't a Zionist because he was born in Palestine. He's five generation of his family born in Palestine, but he was a real worker. He would leave the house 5 o'clock in the morning, coming, and I don't think that he missed one day at work. And I took it from him. For me, working, playing. You remember me playing. I would come to Denver and I will
yeah,
fly the next day. I love it. I never took kind of a rest, maybe with going to Aspen, but even when I went to Aspen, I went to work, you know. Um, the idea of a free day made me feel guilty. Now, people doing the opposite, and I must say, and I would like to finish with my part with it. For me, COVID was an incredible experience because it was the first time I've been with my wife because I was touring all my life. I realized I didn't even know that she can cook. It was an amazing, but it was the first time. It was the first time I've been with myself. That I could think rather than writing papers in an airplane and practicing before gigs. To work on my saxophone, and it was the first time that I realized it's absurd that I can live out of tomato and onion and piece of bread and olive oil. Yeah, my cost of living went down by 95%. If I thought that I need 10,000 pound a month or whatever, I'm on $200 or $300. And a lot of people, a lot of musicians, a lot of artists, a lot of writers understood it. And this is why many of us don't want to go to to where we were. So there is a counter flow of ideas and realizations that actually interfering a lot with the mess that they try to impose on us. And this is why they start to see more and more resistance. Okay? And if they look at their history, it every time the disasters happened when they thought that the battle is behind them. Look at 73 war. It was complete shock because they thought that the Arab would never fight again. And every time they're kind of surprised. In Germany, in Weimar Republic, nobody could see Hitler coming. The Spain,
The
I
financiers
don't
could.
know.
No.
The what?
The financiers could.
Sorry?
The financiers.
Yeah, of course, of course, of course, of course, of course. No, but you understand what I'm saying. What I'm saying that this is something, and I think that some people are going to have. It's not. I'm not talking about just Jews. There are quite a few nasty people involved in this story, from Fauci to Gates to it's a big list. Um, I think that things are starting to crack now, especially now with Delta. Everything is totally unpredictable, and even if you really, really want to believe, but you are locked up again with a new Delta or Lambda or Shmamda or Gamma, it won't make you very happy.
Yeah.
Hey, it was great to be with you guys.
Thank you both for this
Really
conversation.
amazing,
Yeah, I hope we should
amazing.
do this again, definitely.
Yeah, I think there's a
Anyway,
lot.
anytime,
I think
anytime.
there's a lot we could cover. I think there's. I really just. Julianne was talking to me, and I was like, it just. I was like, oh, It was a no brainer. I was like, you guys need to do a show together because you guys are kind of like
Yeah,
Yeah.
looking at some of the
Well,
similar
yeah,
and when
things.
I
very.
So
listened to his interview
Yeah.
last night, I was just laughing. I laughed out loud. So I'm sure I sounded so funny because I was enjoying it so much. So it's a pleasure and an
Yeah.
honor. Mm.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that I wasn't much because I'm kind of under a lot of deadlines with writing,
Yeah.
and I'm a musician, so I'm in my studio and I had to produce a lot of music, so I wasn't communicating much. I wrote to you that I'm very busy and but great. I really enjoyed and learned a lot.
excellent. Well,
Yeah,
let's do
so
it
did
again.
I.
Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Okay,
Thanks you
sounds
both.
good. Thanks, Jason.
Yep.
Bye bye.
Yeah, like if plan a little bit. I was kind of busy. I had a bunch of stuff happen this week that kind of took up a lot of my time. So
I think we're all in the same boat then because I did too.